Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Pearly Health Center of Excellence webinar series. My name is Danny Sinden, and I'm the Director of the Center of Excellence and Research Operations at Pearly Health. Pearly Health is a unique and innovative campus of care, home to more than 600 seniors and veterans living in independent apartments or receiving long-term care. Pearly Health is also a center for research, education, and clinical and therapeutic services. Pearly Health Center of Excellence leads and participates in innovative initiatives, relevant research, and knowledge translation activities that help advance quality of care for older adults living with frailty. Before I introduce our speaker for today, I want to let people know that there will be time at the end of the presentation for questions, and you can do so by writing them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We may also field some questions throughout the presentation, so feel free to enter your question at any point. We also ask that you take a minute or two at the end to complete the short survey that will appear on your screen when you exit the webinar. All right, so we are very fortunate to have Dr. Zayna Khayat as our featured speaker today. Zayna is the in-house health futurist with Deloitte Canada's Healthcare and Life Sciences practice. She is adjunct faculty in the health sector strategy stream at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto, where she instructs courses in healthcare innovation and partnerships in the Health MBA program. Zayna is a growth advisor at Teladoc Health in Canada and advises on emerging health startups. Zayna previously led the Futures team with the National Home Healthcare and Aging Social Enterprise, SE Health, as their future strategist. So before we get started, I just want to thank Dr. Khayat for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation. And I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces. I can't chat with you. I would have otherwise, Danina and Dan and Marlene and Ken and others. So great to have you here. And some of you might have heard some of this before, but maybe I'll put a bit of a different spin on it. I think this series is a great way to bring fresh or different ideas and ways to think about things, for your constituents at Pearly. And I'm going to try to, shake things up a bit. You're going to see a lot of color and a little bit of fun. And then maybe that's part of the broader reframe of the future of aging. All of these slides we'll share afterwards as well. So, a bit of, just to start, I'm in Toronto. So I'm here on acknowledging the land of Indigenous people who have lived here well before we settled, and I'm on the traditional territory of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This picture here by Mike Siwink, he did when we discovered these children beneath the ground, many unidentified. That's all these little stars kind of buried below the earth. And, one thing at Deloitte, we really are trying to do is not just say a land acknowledgement, but also act in whatever way we can. And, there's a lot of things we're trying to do on nation building and reconciliation and the planet. And then one, though, is I make a contribution anytime I'm giving in a public venue to the Gord Downie and Cheney Wenjack Fund. And Cheney and that fund that Gord Downie from the Tragically Hip started was because of this little boy at 10 years old was trying to escape a residential school and died and froze to death on the highway. So I put a QR code if you're able to make a contribution as well to help this fund do something. That's what we're trying to do, not just say something, but do something. I encourage you to do so. Okay, I am going to pull from a few parts of my work and my life. I've been about a year in this futurist role at Deloitte, and so I'm going to pull from some of our work in our Future of Canada Center, which it reflects on what does it mean for our country to enter the super aged, which we will next year. We'll be one of the first, I think, 10 in the world where 1 in 5 of us is over 65. It's kind of never happened in the history of our species, and certainly not in our country. And that's got massive implications for many things. And then We have a point of view at Deloitte on the future of health, and we're actually publishing our Canadian version of that. And I'll show a little bit of that early data. We hope to publish it pretty soon. And really a story about how things are going to likely play out, might play out, and what does that mean for a lot of things. And then of course we have a venture fund at Deloitte where we invest in early stage tech companies with a thesis around aging and aging in place. And then probably the bulk of it though will be from my former life at St. Elizabeth Healthcare, SE Health, where I was their futurist, and we co-authored a book on the future of aging. So I'm going to use the book as the spine and the structure, the 5 chapters, but pull from these and pull a little bit from my work with Teladoc Health in virtual care. As was said, I can't really see you. I've got one screen, so it'll be hard to do this interactive while I'm talking, but go ahead and throw stuff in the chat, and maybe I'll just check in with Danny and the team maybe at 20 minutes and see if anything's coming up. We'll have a little conversation, then we'll continue, and then we'll save some chat for the end. So some of our work at Deloitte, and I think many have studied this, probably the best work I've seen lately, and maybe somebody could drop it into the Q&A or the chat, has just been released from the National Institute on Aging at Toronto Metropolitan University with just some state-of-the-state data on the state of aging in Canada and what people want and where the gaps are. But, you know, I don't think it's a surprise, but I think it is really important because, you know, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So if you're in financial services, you know, you think your job to be done is everything in the middle around retirement and wealth transfer and all that stuff. If you're in the third sector, you know, you're working on social isolation and the stuff on the left, which is what Canadians are looking for. And then, of course, those of us in healthcare, which, as we know, in like a province like Ontario is half of our program spending, we think it's all about health and care and long-term care homes and all the things that, you know, eats up all the discourse. But really, these are not isolated things, you know, and humans, you know, especially older adults, you know, they don't compartmentalize what they want to live, the life they want to live on their terms. And so this is, in my view, the job to be done is how do we start to thread these, because each is interdependent on the other. And that's kind of the new integrated lens all of us as leaders need to take on any issue of public good, where there's social complexity, financial complexity, and medical complexity, and they're all intermingled. And you know, we're not really designed for that in all of the different sectors and systems that solve for this, but that's kind of the lock and the key. So given that, when we kind of set out to do the Future of Aging book with Idea Couture, what we did, you know, classic futures work, if you don't know the methodology, you kind of track and look at all sorts of signals and trends. I think we had 350 signals and trends about something is up with aging. And then, you know, you look at the patterns, you bucket them into themes. And when we did that kind of bottom up, the data just emerged into 5 big themes. And each chapter of the book goes much deeper into like, what is going on here? What's happening? What might it look like if these things continue to play out? And we kind of create like a normative scenario using storytelling and that kind of thing. I'm actually going to start with chapter 5, which every time I present this, I'm like so mad we should have made it chapter 1 because it underpins all of the others, which is just the whole identity of aging. You know, I've often said, you know, we've been through a renaissance compared to, let's say, pre-1960s around sexism, around racism. And again, this is all continues to be work in process. I think the next big reckoning is going to be ageism. And that's kind of what we looked at in this chapter of the book. You know, imagery, language, tone, that kind of starts with a kind of a deficit orientation and as if this natural process in life is a bad thing, if you will, to just, it's inconsistent with what we're actually seeing in the data, in practice, in beliefs, in mindsets. And so, you know, this I just pulled yesterday off of Facebook because, you know, once you do a book like this, you can't not see the patterns right in front of you of, you know, this new generation of mobility scooters that are designed around a VW Beetle or a van. And you should see all the colors and styles and hipster people, you know, riding these, but they're just a mobility scooter. So, I mean, I think that just kind of captures it. Other signals at around the time we were writing the book, this fellow who's kind of like the what's his name? Anthony, who's that big motivational speaker in the US? I don't know why you can say it. You guys know who I'm talking about. The big motivational speaker that's very high energy. He's kind of like that, but a little bit older in the Netherlands. And, but very healthy, very young, very, loves to party. And, he was going through a legal process to change his age because, based on a year of birth, he was this age and that had a set of rules about what he can and can't do and what services he can and can't access, whatever. But he didn't feel that age at all, like in biologically that he's not that age. So it just kind of started a conversation about what is age and what is old. And my daughter was at the Raptors game last night. We unfortunately lost. And whenever I go to those games and I see the halftime show of 20-year-olds with hardly any clothes on doing crazy acrobatics, amazing dancers, and then in other parts of particularly in the US, their halftime show is like here's the Washington Wizards. They're called Wisdom. And it's fun and it's great. And it just reframes a bit of this identity of aging. And we're seeing more and more of this. I think one useful tool I know I've accessed, and I encourage you all to, there's a Center for Aging Better out of the UK that's trying to, reframe the toolkit, the language, the iconography we use to help kind of accelerate this new identity of aging. And, it's just very different pictures that emote something that's very different. And as humans, as you know, most of our mindset comes from seeing and language. And so the words we use and the imagery we use are very, very big contributors to this identity of aging. So that kind of sets the tone and the stage. Let me just check in. Anything going on in the Q&A we want to talk about, or should I keep going? Yeah?
Yeah, I think keep going.
Okay. So throw stuff up, comments, questions, ideas. All right. So let's kind of go to, I'm not going to do all the chapters. I'll just do a bit on aging and community. I'll do deeper on health, given we're talking about Pearly, and on tech, and then a little bit on the economy. So I love, the cover picture of my slide deck was this lovely East Indian woman, and that was taken from this senior living center in the U.S. called Priya, which again, like just the this doesn't feel like big beige and boring, like a lot of what I see here, in North America, and these are the same people entering even nursing home or retirement living, independent living, assisted living. It's got all those services, but really addressing a group, a population that kind of culturally wants to maintain, food, aesthetic, social programming that is not shuffleboard and, whatever. And a very different ethos of community and what it means to be in community. This is not, kind of renting. And so we're starting to see these types of kind of affinity or lifestyle senior living developments really exploding. And I think that gives a lot of promise. The other kind of pattern that gets talked about, and I'd say Canada is pretty slow on the uptake compared to, let's say, Europe, is this idea about not treating everybody as a segment of one based on a very blunt demographic called the year you were born. But challenging, this assumption that like has to always be with like. So intergenerational living models, programs, even policy reform around that, and just rethinking the value exchange, if you will, between younger people who have a lot of things to offer, but are missing a lot of things like affordable housing, like pay for doing tasks, and then older adults who, don't want to accept what's on offer for some kind of housing models, economically, are struggling on a fixed income and those kinds of things. So lots of neat models like Uber for grandkids, and value exchange around real estate. Another kind of creativity we're seeing on how people live, where they live, what they pay for, what they experience, is just new purpose of old real estate forms that have lost their power or interest or what have you. So shopping malls is an example. that, we used to go to this place that was centralized to do our commerce, and there's just many other channels, as you know. And so the role of these places gets lower and lower, yet they're air conditioned, they've got clear hours, they've got good parking, and they're actually a nice place that older adults like to aggregate or congregate. And so this group out of the UK, out of the US, which is a foundation, a nonprofit foundation, has got into these malls, repurposed large space into these day programs for Alzheimer's. But they've embedded science into the experience and the design of the programming. And in this case, they're exploiting the science of reminiscence therapy that is really growing in terms of exposing people to an environment when some of their most formative memories were formed, that are the most pleasurable formative memories, let's say a 60s diner or what have you. It actually, creates better experience and almost diminishes some symptomology. And what I love about this business model is this is a foundation that isn't out to go, make bajillions of dollars off people getting old and having Alzheimer's, and, families not being either able to or wanting to them 24/7 in a memory care center, but rather, just need some respite or need something during the day because people sleep at night. And so, their pricing is like cheaper than I know I've paid for daycare for my own children. And a really scalable kind of franchise model, given there's ample supply of space. So I just think what we saw in this chapter was just a lot of challenging to some institutional norms around facility-based care, around housing, that is just really not fit for today's purpose or what people want or can afford. One area we worked on at SE Health was this idea of housing as a service. So could we create a type of housing stock that people live in because they want to and they can afford to, because it's so a beautiful experience, but more importantly, rented with healthcare services built into the price of the rental. So this business model is really taking off across the US. We've yet to see it really at scale in Canada. The last thing I'll say about new forms of community is one of the shifts we found was this shift from kind of informal caregiving as this thing we all recognize, and you guys have all seen the data of what family and other caregivers contribute to our social welfare. But, we are seeing a shift to actually a formal caregiving economy, and whether they're private entities creating a whole new slew of products and services for this whole category of people who need products and services called family caregivers, employers now making this part of a benefit program, and policy. And, I think that there's been a renaissance in the last, I'd say, 5 years of the organization of the caregiver community, federally, provincially. I think just yesterday, the Canadian Caregiver Association lead was, on Parliament Hill speaking. You could look it up. And that was certainly our experience. When I was at SE Health, our team oversaw a new really division we created called ELIZ, ELIZZ. So a spinoff on St. Elizabeth, but a different brand, to create, the destination for family caregivers. At the time, Gillette had decided they were going to create a category, or their parent company, for older adults, which, as if you guys know consumer goods companies, they don't create new categories every day. This is very rare. And to launch one of their products, this was the commercial some of you may have seen. And I'll just say, when they launched this same product in Canada, they partnered with us at SE Health, and we created the exact same kind of video, but Canadianized it, which maybe one of you can put in the chat, or you could find it. And it was actually with one of our nurses.
Good morning, sir. Ready to get up? Let me get your
Sorry.
feet up. How you doing today? Good morning. I remember always looking at my dad's arms, like when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. He had arms like Popeye. He was a tugboat captain, and I so admired his physique. And now it's a different story, And and that's just the way it is. So my dad had a stroke, and now he can't get around, he can't walk, and he needs me to help him out. And my son Luke and I have been doing it, and I'd do anything for him. I can give you a really good mohawk. You look like a punk rocker. There's a definite role reversal that happens. I have to wake him up in the morning and take care of him and groom him and shave him and shower him. It's actually an honor to do that for your father, because he did it for me when I was a kid. My dad's got the greatest face. His squishy face is just amazing. He's sort of thin-skinned, and I don't want to cut it at all. So I got to be careful with that face. Like, he'll just say, do this, do that. You got to make sure that you shave my neck down. You got to do my lips up. He was really particular about his sideburns. That's where your sideburns start. Okay. I'm not going to touch your sideburns.
Okay, good.
Okay? How am I doing so far, Dad?
Okay.
You know, it takes me like a half an hour to shave my father, because I have to be so careful.
Can't live without it either.
Okay, I will. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. I love that face. Hi. I'm one of the lucky ones. A lot of my friends my age do not have their dads, and I still have my dad. He always says to me, he looks up at me after I pour love on him for the whole day, and he says, I don't know what I did to deserve you. And I say, Dad, I got you. I got you, Dad.
Okay, let me check in on the Q&A. What's happening there? Oh, Dan put the video. Thank you, Dan. So I think what I love about that video, I mean, it's got so much in it. And in the Canadian one that maybe Dan posted with, she was our head of innovation, still is at SC Health, Mary Lou Ackerman, and her dad, you know, she had commented, then made me think about my dad, that, you know, with all the stuff you lose control of when you're maybe in a nursing home or what have you, you know, having a good shave and feeling kind of pulled together, like, makes a very, very big difference, right? And so it's just, these are these kind of insights, and this new dynamic of the family caregiver and the parent, which will be the dominant dynamic as 1 in 5 Canadians are over 65. There's just a whole new slew, you know, of market opportunity, of new services, products, policies, you name it, that have yet to be designed. And it's kind of exciting, because we don't get to have a new market, you know, in Canada. You know, the last one was cannabis, let's say. Okay, let's get into some of the shifts around healthcare, and how we design health services, pay for them, organize them, deliver them. All of those things are just not going to work in the way we've done them in the industrial era. And you know, this population, I think, will be one of the big drivers that will force that. So if we think back to us as a species, for about, I don't know, 99% of the time we've been humans, you know, our health span was very high. So we were out, you know, in sun and exercising and eating extremely well. And then, you know, but, you know, something would happen. Maybe we ran into a tiger, and then we died, right? So, you know, very, very fast kind of morbidity, compression before death. But our average life expectancy was very low for, like, again, 99% of the time we've been on this earth. Our bodies evolved to not be alive this long, you know, because their utility was kind of past the age of reproducing. We have done amazing things with sanitation, with a lot fewer wars, and of course, with medicine to extend life significantly. Then we've layered on a lot of behaviors that are nothing like what our ancestors did with how we sit and smoke and don't see sun and are on our screens and stress and sleep and all those things and McDonald's. And so sure, we are able to extend life, but wow, is it a very, very long decline of the health span, the quality life? And I would suggest healthcare as a publicly funded service, as a public good, because it was built kind of post World War II, where again, we weren't alive that long. Like you got sick and either you died or you got better. Like you rarely stayed alive very long with, let's say, cancer or heart disease. So it was designed to basically save lives. I mean, the metric we still use to this day to measure the quality of a healthcare system is life expectancy. I'm like, wow, is that our barometer? Like, are people alive or dead? And that determines how good? Well, so we're kind of a redo of the goal of healthcare is now to maximize, match the curve of the line of that health span to the lifespan, because that's actually what people want. And so that just is a very different orientation from a sick care system, as we all know. In our Future of Health paper, and this is not yet published, so please just don't go put it publicly because we're still finalizing the numbers, but that'll come out in a month. Let me just orient you. We know all the trends, the signals, one, because it's actually just not affordable. Nobody wants it. But if we start kind of on the bottom left here, the orientation has been a reactive sick care. We wait for symptoms and then we pounce. And the goal of healthcare has been to treat sickness. And we know all the trends are showing that where investments will move is away from that, either vertically up to the starting point, not being treating sickness, but rather creating health. And the timing and the placement of when interventions happen in healthcare, not starting at waiting for the problem, but much, much more proactive, if not predictive. And at least for the Canadian data and definitely in the US data, if we project out to 2040, sick care stays flat. One, we can't finance it anymore anyway. We can't tax Canadians any more than we do. And it's not necessary and it's diminishing returns. And so all the new investment, state investment, so public spending, as well as other players bringing new forms of capital is going to be in those other boxes. So that kind of starts to change, if you're in the sick care bubble as your model, how are you going to start to evolve and be participating in these new areas? Because that's actually where the value is mostly going to be created. And, this could take many forms. When I was in the Netherlands, it just amazed me how different their orientation is around what it means to be an inpatient in a hospital or a nursing home. The metric they use isn't beds. The whole thing isn't oriented around this thing in the room and a person in ugly pajamas being in this ugly beige thing and they're tethered. And then, they're at the whim of whoever comes or goes. You're in street clothes, the bed is put away, and you only go in it when it's time to rest or sleep. It's not the centerpiece. And so we had a whole campaign that in our hospital in the Netherlands, we were trying to evolve from, a major work in the UK called End PJ, pajama paralysis, to change mindsets around the human that's, we're putting into these clothes and putting into this kind of sterile environment. Ours was called Banned Bed Centricity. It was a multi-layered innovation program. It included clothing that, was accessible and stuff, but, you could buy this at Zara or something like that. And this was all led in our hospital by our physiotherapy department. They had a very big leadership role in our hospital because mobility and movement and occupational therapy and all that, is a major, major lever for older adults, who were the primary occupants of our hospital. So, so that's when you're in the walls. My point is there's a ton of reframing and rethinking of how we organize, deliver, pay for services if you have to be in a facility. And then, of course, the next big shift is a major movement out of facility-based care because, like everything else, like we don't have to go to malls to do shopping. We don't have to go to banks to get cash. We don't have to go to restaurants to eat food anymore. That's definitely happening as we move out of kind of facilities, which anchor you in inpatient and sick care, more, decentralizing out to more communities. So smaller sites where you can now be more outpatient and you're in healthcare, but you're still doing services. It's called healthcare. And then that shifts to the home or really anywhere, wherever I choose to call home, whether that's my retirement home, my independent living facility, my nursing home, the house I grew up in, it doesn't matter. My truck, if I'm a truck driver, and that becomes really care anywhere and lot more role of not outsourcing your agency over your health to others, because that's what healthcare is, but a lot more role of people, their families, and their communities self-managing, self-directing, and then popping into formal care when they need to. This is a major shift going on, and that's part of why we see value pools shifting in the future of health. I'm not going to read these, but these were all the new business models that when I was at SE Health, and then even now in our work at Deloitte and even my work at Teladoc, we're helping design and create and scale that really challenge, 150 years of traditional medicine, as well as on the right, a whole new set of service areas that are not really about care that traditional care players are getting into to diversify their revenue, to be much more involved in the lives of people, again, well beyond this very episodic stage of sickness and managing illness. And so just massive opportunity for any of you in this place. Just to kind of put a finer point, as part of our projections, this is the US data. I don't have the Canadian data to share, but we started to model, look on the left of like kind of roughly today, this is where investments are being made in mostly sick care. So hospitals, outpatient clinics, nursing homes. When we model out to 2040, the pie grows a bit, the overall pie, like I talked about, but very little in sick care. But, a very different mix of places and spaces where people access services they need. And so that's kind of the job to be done of the existing players on the left here. How are you going to reinvent yourself and evolve your model to continue to deliver on mission? But you're going to have to participate in very different ways. This has big implications for government policy. And of course, all these other players that never really played on the left are coming into the sector to bring value to older adults. The ones I love the most is recreating at home what used to be done in facilities. So one area is hospital at home or hospital to home and many flavors of it. Just an example of just all these mashups, because you're going to need all these complementary capabilities to make these care models work. It is not the core competency of facility-based entities to understand how to work in the home. It's like the Wild West out there. And so, both Geisinger, a big, very advanced health system in the US that just got bought by Kaiser Permanente, Atrium Health in North Carolina, about the size of Alberta in terms of a healthcare system, nonprofit. They know this future is not building more buildings and making people come to us. So, partnering with Best Buy's health division to create a scalable service to bring hospital level care in the home. I'm obsessed with ER at home. This is yet to come to Canada in a serious way, yet it's scaling so fast across the United States. Incredible care model, experience, economics are sound. It's kind of everything we want, yet here all we hear about is just building more ERs and hiring more doctors to run those ERs. And then, in my time at SE Health, we worked really hard during COVID to say, it doesn't have to be this way. We can build nursing home level care in the home. And then the National Institute of Aging did a great white paper to kind of unbundle that a little bit more. And again, it's still not really happening kind of at the scale it can in other countries. Okay, let me go check in on the Q&A. Yeah, so just some comments about the video. I think, Nicole, I would agree about a male caregiver. I think this video from Gillette, why I like to use it is it actually raises the bar. It changes our mindset, but raises the bar for a lot of us about our norms, about, who gives care and what it means. And it's not always a bad thing. And Danina, comments, especially being Danina's based in Montreal, the whole cultural mindset, given our diaspora, Danina, that Priya living is why I get so excited about that. Like big, beige, boring, Anglo-Saxon styled nursing homes. That is not what the next aging population is looking for. And it's not respecting their kind of cultural preferences. And of course, in Indigenous health, that has been a dominant reason why the inequities are so bad. My colleague at Deloitte, Dr. Lana Potts, she's a family physician and our Indigenous health co-lead. She just wrote an amazing op-ed in the Hill Times, if somebody could find it yesterday, really explaining what I just said in a way that makes way more sense than I did. So very good. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Let's get into technology a bit. And I know Dan McEwen's on, so I always love to show this. I think people love to talk about Geron technology as if like it's this like cold technology that's going to further dehumanize. Everyone wants to right away go to all the bad things. Oh, digital divide. People can't afford bandwidth. People can't use it. I'm like, like those are tiny problems that are no problem to solve. Like people know how to design good tech. You have to think about the role of tech. What does tech do? At the end of the day, technology replaces labor and capital with usually software or some kind of a physical thing that liberates, previously static, high asset size infrastructure. But for older adults or any of us, particularly in the context of aging, though, it makes accessible previously inaccessible experiences, right? Whether that's experiencing exercise, like, this fellow biking and seeing the outdoors because he can't participate in that currently, or healthcare access, or mobility, or social companionship. I mean, that's kind of what it does. And, some of these new models, and this was from Motiview, a company out of Norway that's brought some of this technology into some Canadian older age facilities. This idea that the biggest world sports event is older adults kind of competing or riding from wherever they are. It's just such a different reframe of what we think about of sporting events, and of course the byproducts are multiple, well beyond physical health. We see this with other things. So again, you're using existing tools, like the other one was a TV screen and a bike. In this case, the Wii controller, the Nintendo Wii, and this is like massive bowling league, across the US. Another big area where technology, again, making accessible previously inaccessible real world experiences, obviously transportation. And so we're just seeing like a whole area of groundswell that we looked at in the book and some of my other work around, moving people or moving things to people instead of them to things. So, companies like Ford Motor Company, which has been in the auto manufacturing industry for over 100 years, getting into, and GM has done the same thing, other service lines involving transportation, because it's actually their business model. They're in the business of transportation, not manufacturing cars. And of course, Lyft and Uber and all these others, with really creative asset-light business models. I've had my eye on this company, Voyage, for a while, that started in the US from a few ex-Uber and Tesla folks. And they really see the self-driving revolution, because again, technology makes accessible previously inaccessible experiences. This segment of the population will be the driver. It's not, the people who want convenience or those kinds of things. And so just all sorts of new business models. Another kind of mythology we have, or dominant mindset around cold technology, is, let's call them bots, whether they're humanoid, like physical bots that can help with ADLs, IADLs, so activities of daily living, but also social companionship and all sorts of things. In Japan, they've already crossed the threshold of the super aged, 1 in 5 over 65. I want to say 10 years ago, maybe more. Like what we've been talking about for 30 years, they've been at it for a very long time. So they don't have time to just keep pontificating and having ideology. Like there's real needs, and they've had a lot of practice. So, you know, for the government then to make a policy that 4 out of 5 people, aging adults in Japan will get state funded support to have help at home from a robot, where, you know, so then your question, your policy work is about how will we roll this policy out? Whereas here, the conversation is still no, like I've decided that is not good because of maybe too much movie watching. And so then, of course, we don't open our minds to, you know, these new models. And, you know, a lighter, capital intensive and labor intensive version is more digital companions, avatars, bots, humanoid like or not. But, you know, one thing we've been doing a lot at Deloitte is building these with healthcare organizations. So this is one that's a digital pharmacist that actually is on a screen in the pharmacy. But you go to the digital pharmacist and you work through a lot of your questions that maybe like you're embarrassed of the white coat of the pharmacist to ask, or they're too busy. And side effects, you know, comorbidity, whatever. And then when you need to see the human, you go to finish off whatever care you need on site. And this is done in retail centers, not obviously in clinics. And then with Ottawa Hospital, we did a webinar on this at Deloitte a few months ago, you know, for discharge. So when a particularly older adult gets discharged after, you know, staying at a hospital for maybe a fall or whatever, you give them like these like PDFs of paperwork of all their instructions, very complicated. They have lots of questions, but they have to wait for that appointment in 2 weeks. And by then the wound might have bleeded or whatever. And so we basically, you know, there's this person, Sophie, you just talk to her whenever you want. And the generative AI is just loaded with the discharge instructions. Like it's no different from calling the hospital and trying to talk to somebody, but being put on wait. And of course, a big explosion of mobility enhancers that are just going to look very different from, you know, I already showed you that Volkswagen scooter, but just the science and the technology, the miniaturization, the big beige and boring going away, and just being kind of ubiquitous, you know, is a big area. My only comment here is actually designing the new tech, the point solution is the easy part. What I would say most Canadians have failed to do in all health innovation that involves tech, but particularly on older adults, is the design of the service model and the business model that works and scalable. And so, for example, when I was both at Mars, you know, leading all the health startups, and then at SC Health with our futures team, we would meet 5 or 6 startups a week, like with their one-point solution for monitoring or whatever. And, you know, I'm like, well, I'm not wowed by yet another way to monitor what, you know, that's the easy part. You know, I contrast that with, for example, how easy it was for whoever came up with this service to engage with people at home using the Alexa platform. So existing technology that everyone's already using, but then linking it to the Amazon distribution platform for payment, for, you know, adjusting the service model, for all those things. Like that's the hard part, because you have to work with so many people along the value chain, test a business model, get it to scale. And of course, the only way this gets to people is it has to be sold. That's sales and marketing. And that's a bad word in Canada. But if you don't do marketing, nothing gets used. And wow, have I seen a graveyard of stuff that sat in an academic center and they made it perfect. Then nobody uses it, and then they declared it doesn't work. I'm like, no, you just didn't know how to sell it, even if it's publicly funded. Okay, and then the last area that, again, I think is, we did a whole chapter on this in the book, and I'm obsessed with, is what I call necrotech. You know, our kids are going to look back at the way we, you know, planned for end of life, died, whatever we did with the remains, how we memorialized, and how we memorialized into perpetuity. And like, you know, we've basically got a couple blunt things we do. Most Canadians die in a hospital, 70%, yet 70% of Canadians don't want to die in a hospital. You know, we either cremate or we put you under a ground, you know, for the earth. That's terrible. And it's just not really what the new generation wants. So there's all these new models of what to do with the remains, and then, you know, funeral homes and all that is up for grabs. So there is so much going on here, and there's a couple great Canadian companies that have been among the leading innovators, and it's been great to see. I'm just going to finish tech, and then I'll check in on the Q&A. Let me check. Oh, I better wrap up soon. Just data. You know, I think we're going to drop the word electronic. I think we're not going to look at medical data. It'll be the life record. And this statement, data will do more for health than all of the life sciences, all the hard tech, the medical devices, the drugs, the hospital, all that combined. Nothing will compare to how easy it will be to do the right thing for people with good information. I'm just going to skip this video because I want to, I'll share it afterwards. Okay, I'm just going to wrap up and I'll just say, you know, I've talked quite a bit about technology. So obviously technology, again, allows us to do things that weren't possible before. There's no question. We have no shortage of this. It's going to keep going. But the next two to me is the unfinished business. A lot of times why people's needs aren't being met, particularly in a public good, like health, education, climate, is because there are policies that block the ability to do what's right that no longer serve. Like I was just with my uncle last night. He's 82. You know, he went to hospital in Windsor in an ambulance. And guess how long the ambulance driver sat with him until he finally got into the ER? 9 hours. And they wouldn't let his wife be with him that entire 9 hours. Like, are you kidding me? Why? That's the policy. I'm sorry. So you innovators, whatever you are, whether you're a clinician, a tech company, a CEO of a long-term care home, you need a methodology as much as you're focused on solutions and new care model, blah, 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 on policy innovation. It has to be in your core competency. And then ultimately people decide what's going to work. The people that you're trying to deliver this new thing with, the people that you want to embrace and adopt, the people you want to pay. You know, there's a whole behavioral psychology and economics that has to be a core competency for this stuff to fly. So, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, and maybe we'll move into some conversation. Thank you. All right, so I see Colin is on. Colin leads innovation for the Saskatchewan Health Authority, the home of where Medicare came. And I always find Saskatchewan is the first to do a lot of things because they just get on with it. And so I think he put the Dutch Dementia Village in there, which, yeah, we did a lot in our book. Again, Canadian delegation after Canadian delegation has been going down the Netherlands to see how they built these villages for dementia. So we love studying things, but we don't do them. Netherlands has had their dementia village for over 30 years. We have our first one opened in Canada out in BC. You know, this should just be normal. Yeah. Mary Ann made a comment about AI. Yeah, so those the robots I showed, obviously they're powered by AI. It's just, it's not about the AI because it's the whole package, right? AI converges with multiple parallel modalities, you know, tech modalities, but also service and business model. It all comes together. So it's not really about the AI, but again, what does technology do? Technology lets you do things you couldn't before. And AI is allowing us to do things we couldn't before around sensing something and then responding the way a human likely would have, maybe better than a human would have, because we've got this kind of algorithm in there that's helping us. Yeah. So Danina's asking the age-old question that Danina knows, you know, 1 month long conferences try to answer her question about, you know, moving from piloting to doing, you know. So I remember working with an org and I tried to go down this path saying we've banned the word pilot because it carries with it this expectation that the goal is to get to pilot. And then we start over like, oh, geez, now how are we going to implement? I mean, I think the difference is, you know, R&D, which is what you're doing when you're piloting, right? You're developing something and testing it. You're experimenting. It's just you're not in a lab with chemicals. Any corporation that has an R&D division, you know, Shell Oil Company, a pharma company, GE, it doesn't matter. You don't just do that because you want to get to, you know, a phase 1 trial and be like, oh, wow, that worked. Now what do we do? Like the intention is scale if or when it works. And I think that's what's missing, Danina. Like I always said, there should be, you know, and basically the corporation will not fund the R&D development if that's not how they are designed. So that should be how the financing when we get to pilot stage, which tends to be grants, you know, and those kinds of things. It's rarely financed in Canadian healthcare out of working capital or operating capital. Well, then it's got to be linked to a clear, proven methodology to scale after with a buyer, with a payment model. And if you don't see line of sight to that or a methodology to get line of sight to that, don't fund the pilot and don't do the pilot, in my opinion, because you've actually destroyed value by getting to, land of pilots. So that's kind of my view, but that takes, again, a very different mindset, courage. It's not Canadian to be so direct and to kind of demand performance. Like, we got to demand performance. Like, I often think if patients knew how much waste we generate of just paying for stuff that we know doesn't work or will never work, I think there would be rioting in the streets. So, all right, Marlene out in Alberta, a major leader in I think Marlene's like my sister from another mister of shaking up mindsets on aging. So just on, challenging around innovation and policy and practice. So again, you're exactly right. So I said, we are great at the solution layer of innovation. So designing new care models, they often involve tech, so they get very sexy. We need as much of an R&D engine federally, provincially, and locally. Every org, all of you orgs on here, you need an R&D center for what Marlene's talking about. New policy innovation, payment model innovation, business model innovation. This is the unfinished business, because you're not going to get a policy innovation right the first time you do it, just like no lab scientist's experiment works the first time. So it's a whole slew of experiments and a couple stick, or you end up combining. That's the new capability and core competency. Colin is asking about uptake of tech. So I think the one thing I'd really try to distill in people, and again, we're very bad at this at Canada in general, but really bad in healthcare, is we treat everything, because we have for 150 years, as a segment of one. Okay, so imagine if you are, Warner Brother Records, and you're like, okay, we're going to treat every consumer of music as one segment. They're all going to get either Ariana Grande or like Kenny Rogers. Okay, you'd be like, no, that's not how the world works. Well, that's how older adults are too. At SE Health, we've actually, with the Research Institute has done a ton of evidence-based analysis. There's webinars on it. There's a great long ones on to actually segment the frail older population into 7 very clear segments that have a very different ecology of social complexity in terms of caregiver support, blah, 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 and medical complexity. And the care models you can design are completely different. So that's what you have to think about with tech. You cannot make a big brush and say, oh, old people don't use tech or can't or won't. No. There's a segmentation. There was a study that came out that showed on average, older adults are on their iPads 10 hours a day. That's like my teenagers on their phone all day, right? I know going through a lot of, older adults that I've been the caregiver for, the equivalent of the iPad in my generation was TV all day, on all day. That's their robot companion, by the way, the television, the sound, the noise, the visual. So now it's an iPad. So actually older adults are the best users of an iPad compared to young teenagers and 20-year-olds, because they don't use iPads. They use their phone and they text. They don't know how to type and, So anyway, so I just think, I don't think they're left behind. I think we're designing, if you look at Apple's products and that whole movement, the guy who ran for mayor in Toronto, I forget his name. He's from a South American country. He was part of the whole, the 8 to 80. So how do you design a city, a policy, a piece of technology that it works for an 80-year-old and it works for an 80-year-old? If you can get the bookends, it's fine. And I think it's just a design problem. Yeah, Colin's saying he loves the TV. And Anja, we've just moved my in-laws into a retirement home in Northern Ontario, and they haven't been figuring out how to get their cable to work. It's a brand new home. And when it goes out, it's the worst day for them. It's the worst day because it takes days to come back on, right? That's a digital divide. That's an inequity. That has nothing to do with Wi-Fi or anything like that. Yeah. All right. I'll just kind of end. Marianne's asking, how can those in healthcare be more entrepreneurial? I teach an entire university level course to answer your question, Marianne. So I'll do the 1-minute version. I think, again, it's a little bit of what I've been talking about and why I say yes to come and do these things. Is to shake everybody up, right? Like me, Danina, Dan, Colin, like we're already there. We get it. But 90% of the people in our health and care system, policymakers, they're preserving the status quo. And I'm not making a value statement. That's the DNA. The DNA is to say we accept the model we have. We just need to make it better. And that's a path to destroy value. So pick a word: innovation as a new competency, partnerships, future proofing, new business models, a policy. And this is the new competency. This is the new skill set. And it's just new to us. We're babies because we love solving problems by making solution to problem. We focus on the solution, which often involves tech. And this is the new competency, is being as competent on the people angle, behavioral psychology. I hate the word, but change management, marketing, communications, and policy innovation. Okay, I'm going to stop there and let you guys get on with your day. That was a lot of fun. Thank you. Good, great questions, and nice to see people.
Oh my goodness, that was such a great discussion. Thank you so much, Zayna. I had a whole bunch of questions lined up that I wanted to ask, but we've run out of time, so you may be hearing from me. But I'd like to just extend our sincere thanks to Zayna for this enlightening presentation and sharing her insights and expertise. It was such a privilege to hear you speak, and so inspiring to think of what the future of aging could look like and how we can all play a role in that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you.
And thanks for creating the platform, Pearly, for having these conversations. It's really, really important.
Thank you. And thank you as well to all who attended today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. I think by all the lively chat that everyone did. Please stay tuned for information on our upcoming webinar in March. And in the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about the Center of Excellence, our current projects, or how you can get involved, please visit our website at pearlyhealth.ca/Center of Excellence. And thank you again, Zayna Khayat, and have a great day, everyone.